It is recording again. No hiccups this time. Extra, I'm looking at you. Okay, so what's happening is we're going to be looking at the economy. Okay, as I mentioned just earlier, we're going to be looking at the different decisions that you can make when you are looking at your economy. We're going to be looking at the fundamentals and what exactly it is that leads to better economic decisions. The first few things that we're going to be looking at is just the basics. What gives you money? What earns you more money? Okay, we're going to be looking at different buys, the different types of situations that you'll find yourself in. You can consider them patterns, if you will. We can look at different ways of gaining an edge. We'll look at strategies that you can gain. You can look at things like what you can do if you don't have enough money to make plays. We're going to be looking at those things. There's a huge balance between those. Okay, so let's start from the beginning with that. When you are looking at money, there's different ways of earning it. Okay, kills earn you 200. Every single kill you get is just multiplied by that 200. So let's say, for example, you get 3 kills. That's just 600 credits. When it comes to plants, you actually get 300 per person, but with 5 players on the team, you get 1,500. That means that it is a collective fund that you guys can use to get an edge. So for example, if let's say someone needs that extra little bit to get a full buy and you already have a full buy on you, then you should be planting. But if you're looking at something like everybody is poor, between the two decisions of picking up a rifle and planting, you're much better off picking up the rifle. Sometimes you have enough time for both, but if you have to make that decision, go ahead. This is what you see players as well not planting when a round is finished or when the last kill is gained, to run for an op, for example. It's not just because the op is a great gun, it's just a huge economic investment. So it is important for you guys to look at what exactly the difference is between the plants and the guns. If I had to suggest which one you should pick, I think the rifle is really good. If you don't have a rifle, I would suggest that you should pick that up instead. Winning a round gives you a net of 3,000 credits. There's never an increase, so winning more rounds is not going to give you more, or it's not going to give you less. You gain 3,000 credits. However, losing will give you less money. Okay, we're going to talk about that little 1,000 credits in just a second as to how that happens. Okay, there's a lot of different things that could occur when you are looking at losing rounds. And the first thing that we need to look at is understanding that there's 3 different tiers of the loss economy. When you are playing, the first loss is going to net you 1,900 credits. So you're going to notice that that's not really enough to make a play. You've been basically punished for losing. The second one is 2,400. 2,400 is enough to start making some plays around your loss economy. You can start making more half buys. You can start making a little bit more risky plays. And last but not least, you're going to notice that 3 losses gives you 2,900. Now that's enough for a rifle. Assuming that you have extra money on the side, you're going to be able to use that to maybe, for example, gain a little bit more from your rifle. Maybe you can have a half shield on the side, or maybe just a little bit of utility. Okay. This is where the 1,000 comes in. When you lose, you gain 19 or 24 or whichever you're going to be getting out of these 3. But if you save, you gain 1,000. If you have a rifle that's enough to give you some sort of shield, maybe it can give you a little bit of utility. Maybe you have just enough to afford somebody else's rifle. It is good to think about how much money you're going to be earning regardless of these 3. And it is good to look at the strategy revolving how much money you guys have overall. There's a cap of 9,000 credits. This should also be considered when you're saving. This should also be considered when you're buying somebody else. You should always try to keep your money, you should always avoid reaching the cap. You're actually losing extra credits. You could buy yourself a ghost or a sheriff, or buy somebody else a different gun that they could have on the side. I'm about to cap out. Buy them an op. Let's see what happens when they have both rifles, both a rifle and an op, right? Try different things. There's other things that we should keep in mind. So for example, diffusing does not give you extra money. That's just you winning the round, right? There's no reason to give you extra money for that, but it does grant you an ult point, which is economic ult economy that we can look at some other point in time when we look at abilities. Overtime gives you 5,000 credits. I think everybody knows this, but if you have missing players, you get a bonus. Okay, so I believe that it is 6,000 something if you get a missing player. I rarely have missing players in my OT, thankfully, but like OT, having a missing player gives you some sort of compensation for that. Okay. So let's talk about understanding the economy in terms of buys. Okay. This is where the heart of the matter is when it comes to the economy. Looking at different buys, is a little rough, and we're just going to get into it with just a moment. But let's just talk about the objective. When you are playing with your team, when you are playing in a team, when you're doing anything regarding with your team, you need to make sure that you're buying with your team. What that means is that you're keeping everybody's purchases equal. So let's say somebody decides to save, everybody should save. There should be no reason why that extra player should be buying. And we're going to talk about a strategy where if that is the case. But you got to make sure that you keep your purchases equal, because everybody needs to be on the same page and on the same strength. Because money is very easily wasted when you're not paying attention to who's doing what.
Nano,
What's up?
what if you sit there and tell them to save and they don't?
We're about to talk about that in just a second. If they are negligent and they are just ignoring you, then that's a completely different case. But the objective is that everybody should be buying at the same time. If you have any sort of questions in regards to, I don't know how much I should be saving, how much I should be spending with my team, let's say everybody says let's buy this much. Make sure you have a rifle for next round. Okay. This is where you need to start looking at things like your minimum next round. And we're going to talk about how many credits you actually need for that. But you make sure you're looking at this little box next to your buy menu, right below your credits. This is going to give you a really good advantage in figuring out how much money you need, because unlike CSGO, you don't have to guess. You can just figure it out simply by looking at the screen. Okay. So again, make sure you're looking at your team. Make sure you're buying the same. It's the same with everybody else. Make sure that you're not making poor decisions by buying an op when everybody else is on pistols. Okay, so let's just keep an eye on that. This is where it starts getting weird. This is where the entire skill curve comes into fruition with different buys. Let's talk a little bit about the normal buy. The normal buy is usually a rifle with a full shield. The type of rifle that you pick is completely up to you, complete preference. In 2023, at the end of the year, they did a survey. It turns out that most pro players love the Vandal. Okay, over time that might have changed a little bit, but the survey was simply saying people just prefer the Vandal. It's just a lot better. Yada 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 yada. They had their reasons. Okay. However, the heavy shield to light shield became a little bit more muddled. Okay, a normal buy usually means in ranked they're going to be buying a full shield and a rifle. That's equal to 3,900 credits, and that means that every single time you look at your mid next round, that's how much you should have if you're going to make that decision. The reason I put a plus next to it is because there's abilities, there's utility in the game that you also have to consider. So let's say that you like to main jet, you should be aware of how much a smoke is going to cost. You should be aware of how much money you should need. So if you want to go for a full strength buy, maybe you need something like 4,500 credits as opposed to just the 39. But if you want to be at the base level with everybody else, no utility involved, 39 is really all you need. This is where things get a little bit muddy, okay? Pro players, and I would say other types of players, ranked and whatnot, have noticed that you can get a lot more buys just simply by buying half shield. This is what introduced the half shield meta. Now, I don't remember who introduced it. It might have been 100 Thieves, but Fnatic popularized it. Okay, and I believe that I was looking at interviews, I was listening to pros talk about it, and there is a skill curve involved with having half shield. For example, if you get sprayed through a smoke, you'll die a lot quicker. If you're running and you're jumping around corners, you're going to lose a lot more HP. Okay, if you're playing against eco weapons like a judge, it actually will kill you a lot faster. You are more prone to getting ecoed, right? There's a little bit of a skill curve. You're more susceptible to danger, but you get more buy rounds. Whether that's worth it or not is completely up to you. If you're in a team, I suggest and I encourage teams to try it out. There might be something that could come from it. And I believe that this is the reason that the Outlaw was introduced. The Outlaw was introduced to fight this type of economy. Did it work? I don't really think so. There are a lot of plays that you can make with both of these strategies in mind. Now, again, this is the normal buy, and you're going to notice that the one thing that is consistent is the rifle. Make sure that the rifle is your main weapon. I see that there's a lot of silvers that make this their sword. They like to use the Spectre because they find it amazing. It sounds great. They can move faster. I don't know what their deal is, right? Something like that. They just feel amazing while using the Spectre. They have their own reasonings, their own headcanons as to why this gun is amazing. You should refrain from doing that. Try to make sure that you're maining the rifle of your choice, whether it's the Phantom or the Vandal. That is the main thing that you should be getting from this. So with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit more about the different types of buys when we're not talking about a normal buy. This is what we're going to be jumping into when it comes to strategizing. Okay, there's different things. There's 4 different types of buys that I can really name right off the bat for you. Anything else is just a little bit extra, a little bit more pizzazz. So what I've shown an example of right here is a light buy. One second. Sorry. Excuse me with that one. I had to cough. So cheap guns, you're basically doing it with the intention of damaging the enemy eco. You're trying to get kills. Maybe you get a lucky clutch. Light buys have the intention of just having a little bit less money than the opponent. This is not your normal buy. You're doing it with the intention of, again, breaking the enemy's economy while potentially still having the min next round to buy for another round. This is where this comes in. And this is the most popular form of buying. There's the normal buy, and then there's the light buy. Very often than not, you'll see things like people confusing a light buy with an eco, people confusing a light buy with a force. A light buy is just the choice of strategically picking slightly worse weapons with the intention of lowering eco because they can still buy next round. Now, what happens with partial buys? If anyone is confused of what a partial buy is, this is where strategic plays tend to revolve a little bit more with a little bit more teamwork and a little bit more cohesion. Okay. If you are someone that's in a team, partial buys might be something that you cater towards. A good example of this is, I forgot their name just a moment ago. Basically, the team had 3 players on rifles. They would put their entries on rifles, and then the support players would just be on pistols. And what they would do is, entry players would go in, they would entry, they would die, they would drop their gun, and then the people that didn't buy like guns or rifles, they would instead pick up those guns, and then they would use them to clutch the round. And they would do this. They would revolve around their entire play with that partial buy. Now, you can do this in your ranked game. Let's say you can tell your player, I'm going to be going in with the judge. If I die, pick it up, right? This is an example of a partial buy that you can use to basically get a different type of experience. Maybe you can use it to get a little bit more bang out of your buck. Maybe you are someone that has way more credits than everybody else. You can now share this gun around. This is really popular in partial buys, right? But this is different than something else like a hero buy. A hero buy is a very ranked play. So now we go from something that's partial buys, where your team is strategizing around you, to a hero buy. Depending on whether the team knows your strategy or not is what makes the difference between a partial buy and a hero buy. Okay? A hero buy is you are going to go out there and try to make an impact and try to carry the round for your team. It is completely different, as whether they pick up your gun or not is not part of the strategy. So this is really popular with Jet players and Reyna players, for the obvious reason of Jet being able to get out of danger quickly and Reyna being able to play and heal up and then pick up a gun and then upgrade, right? A hero buy is the intention of trying to carry the round by yourself with the intention of maybe getting something out of it. In the decision tree that we made a while back, I basically showed how Jet players can essentially buy a sheriff on the second round and be the solo force player and try to see if they can get some kills. Now, I've seen a lot of success with players like that are really confident in their shots, and they can just carry the round even though they lost the pistol round, simply because they're able to use their mechanics and their aim to buy ahead of the team. And if they lost, they're confident enough of playing maybe with a guardian or maybe no shield, right? These are things that you can kind of do and kind of pay attention to. Hero buys are not recommended, but like I said, you can take 3 risks and a half. Maybe a hero buy is one of them. I don't know. Up to you. This is where the last one comes in. Forcing is weird. Forcing is, again, not an eco. Forcing is not a light buy. Forcing is basically the point where you are forced to make a buy to make a different play happen. So let's say you lost pistol rounds. You do not have the money to fully buy. In fact, you are not well equipped if you buy, but you force the money in order to put a play into the field. You can do this, for example, when your team is really down on rounds and the enemy's about to win. Maybe they're on their 11th or 12th round and you don't want them to win. That is an example of a force. It is different than a light buy. It is different than a partial buy. You're basically doing it to try to change the tide of the round. Let's say that it is you lost 11 rounds on the first half, and you need to basically change it so you do not give them the pistol round. So you lose the pistol round, now you have to force, right? You're forced to make that decision. You're not really doing it out of your own volition, right? You can call it a force in second round, again, because you're not well equipped to make that play, but you need to do it, right? So that's what a force is. Now, I mentioned ecos in just a moment, and I didn't really put it in here. Eco, basically the play is simply you're not going to be buying anything. You're just going fully dry. You're trying to save as many resources as possible. You're just going to buy a pistol, okay? Consider it a pistol buy. Some people thought that they could include the stinger into it. That doesn't really count. So yeah, make sure that you're thinking about the eco buy as we're going dead broke. We're not buying anything. This round is a loss, okay? We're going to talk about how you can use these things into consideration when making plays. I think this is a good point, yeah, to ask. Does anyone have any questions so far? No questions? Perfect. Let's talk a little bit about gaining an edge. So this is where the strategy part of the game comes in. 3 stages. There's 3 different stages that you can think about when you're playing the game. There's the wealth stage, there's the balance stage, and then there's the broke stage. Depending on which one you are in any of these positions will dictate how you play the rest of the round. Okay? The wealthy plays basically revolve around really risky plays. Really risky, really expensive buys that you can use to essentially give yourself a huge advantage over the opponent. You can use wealthy buys to try to snowball your way into better rounds. However, it is a double-edged sword, and if you fail a wealthy buy, you'll jump from this into a balance round. Let's talk a little bit about the balance round. If you're using something like a balance round, it is pretty much where most of the normal plays tend to work, okay? There's a huge balance in between what type of risky plays you're going to make, what type of aggressive plays you're going to make, and what kind of passive plays you're going to be making. But because you're in a balanced position, most of the time you have a tiny little line that you're treading. You're treading about 1 or a 2 round difference in which you can go from a balanced round to a broke round or a wealthy round, okay? The way that I tell players to kind of pay attention to whether they're about to go into the wealthy stage or the broke stage, regardless of whether they've been balancing or not, is how many players they lose per round. It is very easy for you to look at your team and notice that you're losing 4 players per round. It doesn't really quite matter that you're winning your rounds. It doesn't really quite matter how many rounds you've won. It is still going to happen where you're in a really, really thin balance where you can't make those aggressive plays. You can't make a wealthy play and buy an Odin or an Op because it is very quick for you to lose all of that money if just 1 extra player dies. Okay? Make sure you're paying attention to that balance, okay? This is where most of your players are going to be. This is where most of your games are going to be. It is very easy to lose this balance, okay? But this is where most of the normal buys tend to go. So don't think that you should be scared to make a play. This is where most of the plays are. I just need you to be aware that it's really easy to lose that. Now, broke, I think that was pretty self-explanatory. You're not encouraged to make solo plays. You're not encouraged to make your own type of little individual mastermind play that you can do on your own. You have to make sure you're not wasting utility by yourself. Broke rounds is where you generally want to stick with your team or focus on close range encounters or long range, depending on the type of gun you pick. And you're generally stuck again with the encounters that you're basically going to be picking depending on your loadout, okay? When you're in the broke stage, you are going to be stuck in more team-oriented scenarios. So you should avoid doing things like, you guys fake B, I'm going to go A and try to see if I can get a pick. I see that very often. They think they can just change the tide despite the fact that they're broke, right? And this is where things like, again, these different plays revolve around what type of strategy you pick. So if you want to do something like a hero buy, everybody else could be broke, but you're in the balance stage. Whether that's enough to change the tide, that's completely up to you. Maybe everybody else is balanced and you are the one that is in the wealthy stage. I'm going to buy an op. That could be enough to snowball your team all the way up to the wealth stage. Or it could be enough for everybody else to be broke. Or maybe you'll be broke and everybody else will be balanced. You can see how this line is very easy to tread. And I need you guys to be fully aware of what stage you're in to decide which type of play you're going to be making. Again, most of the time you want to buy with your team. So if everybody else is wealthy, you should consider to try to be a little bit more wealthy too. Okay? Does anyone have any questions in regards to how you pick strategy so far? None? Okay. So this is one where like the basic plays kind of come in handy for players. Like I mentioned, a lot of team play is involved. This is mostly for the broke section. If you're broke, if you are having a really hard time playing, you have only 2 different ways of playing. You have hyper aggressive plays where your entire team decides to work down a particular lane and try to control it as best as possible. So this is easier to control rotations, or it's easier to control how many people enter a particular site. Okay. You can use hyper-aggressive plays with the intention of playing around your weapons or your limitations, and maybe try to use something to even out the field, like an ult, or maybe, for example, a weapon that someone else picked up. The second one that you can use is funneling. Funneling is not the easiest play to kind of make, it is only useful against certain teams. And the teams that are mostly useful against, they're mostly useful against teams that are overconfident or they are aware of their their economy stage. So let's say that you are broke and the enemy team is wealthy. Well, it's very likely that they're going to see their wealth as an advantage and they're going to try to use it to push out into a particular lane. You can use that to your advantage by buying weapons at the brink of your brokenness. So you can do something like buying a Bucky or buying a Judge. Everybody's on shorties and they're hiding inside of maybe for example, a smoke, right? Plays like these may seem stupid, but at the end of the day, if 5 players are doing a stupid play, it is no longer a stupid play, it is a strat. Okay, so make sure you're paying attention to these types of things that you can do. And again, the same thing works against wealthy opponents. The same way it works against broke opponents. If you're really wealthy, then you're probably going to kind of play your distance and make sure that you're not ego swinging corners, right? Make sure you're paying attention to that stuff when you're looking at your money and the enemy's money. This is where we start looking at the art of forcing. There's 2 categories. There's the high risk. This is a lot harder for you to kind of get value out of. And then there's the low risk. It's a lot easier to get it's a lot easier to get value out of it. Both are rewarding in their own way. However, depending on the situation, depending on the map, I encourage you to kind of explore your options. So depending on the situation, you might find that in the easy category, you might have an easier chance of using the Judge as opposed to the Stinger, and vice versa. Maybe you do not have enough range to play with the Stinger, but you have enough range to play with the Judge. Maybe the Stinger is not successful enough, so you can switch to the Judge. All of these things kind of go into the consideration that you're picking close angles, right? The harder one is, of course, thinking about things like the Sheriff, thinking about the Marshal, and the Shorty. I mean, I added the Shorty there with the intention of understanding that it's not just about easy is not just close range and hard is long range. Okay, the Sheriff and the Marshal are both really difficult weapons to get full value out of. If you decide to play against a full rifle team and your entire team has Marshals, you might or might not be successful, but you're going to notice that most often than not, Marshal players tend to go for the head, and there's a lot less leniency when you're playing against teams like that. Same thing with the Sheriff. The Sheriff can be a very scary weapon to play against, but at the same time, they need to have the aim to back it up. And this is why it's a hard weapon to use, and that's why it's a high risk weapon, because it's very easy to miss your shots. Whereas something like a Judge or a Stinger, you can spray and you might get lucky to get value. Okay. The reason I added the Shorty is because it might be really difficult for players to figure out the difference between the longer distances between the Shorty, or some people might not have the weapon to use the Shorty. I know that players that like to use Race, they can get a double satchel and then a Shorty play. That might be easy for them, but someone like a Brim might not, right? So pay attention to what kind of character you have when you're picking your weapon and what kind of position you are in when you're picking your weapon. So if you're stuck on B site on Ascent, you might want to pick a Judge, right? If you're someone that likes to pick a really fast entry on Race, again, on Bind, say you go A side, maybe a Shorty works for you. Maybe you're a KJ that likes to support the teammate from the back and everybody else is entering. Maybe you might be able to capture some kills with the Sheriff. Make sure you're paying attention to those positions. Make sure you're paying attention to how you're entering. This will help you get a huge edge. And it might just be enough to get a kill or make the difference between a clutch and a loss. This is where we start talking about map advantages. Now, we talked just a moment ago about how you can pick different weapons and different positions regarding your situation. Now, depending on whether you're in the wealthy stage or in the broke stage, you can actually decide how different weapons might affect the map that you're picking. So for example, when Haven was a thing, C site, if you picked an Op or a Marshal, you would control C lane, okay? You would control all of C long, that entire lane would be yours. If you're playing on something like Breeze, I keep forgetting the names of the teams. There was a team that realized that they were broke. They picked the 5 Marshal play, and all they realized is that if we all hit body shots, we'll get kills. And they won the round. It was kind of insane. This is when like old Breeze was a thing, and it was like the long cave area was a thing. Okay, so that was a play that they tried. For example, we have the Odin. It's really useful on defending this lane right here on short, because hookah is pretty much all wall bangable. Or you can do something like using it on Ascent, where the walls are just paper, right? So make sure that you're paying attention to which weapon you're using when you're making that decision, and make sure you're paying attention to the enemy team. Because I've noticed that teams don't pay attention fully to how much money the enemy has, and they're just jumping in without having a realization that they could just very easily body shot someone twice without the need of a headshot in order to finish them off, right? So if you're using something like an Odin and you realize they're in the broke stage, you might be able to fully hold the lane on your own, and your team can stack out in another position, right? So make sure you're paying attention to stuff like that in order to get an advantage just from the map alone, not the weapon, from the map. Okay, pay attention. Last but not least, this is where we jump into the hunting versus saving debate. When do you do it? When is the best time to hunt an opponent? When should you try to save? I find that players, most often than not, they default into, I am going to be playing with my team, so I'm either going to just die with the weapon, try to hurt their economy, or they're going to hunt with the intention of, we have so much money, let's just do it, why not, right? Those are really good ways to thinking about it, okay? So the best way to think about whether you should hunt or save is to look at the two edges of this little Venn diagram. If you're in the wealthy stage, like I just mentioned, you should be using it to the best of your ability of keeping the opponent down, okay? This is going to be a great place for you to fight for ult orbs. This could be a great place for you to hunt for opponents when they are down money, right? You might think the risk is not worth it, but if you get the kill, they're staying down a little bit more, right? You can also use it with the intention of looking at the difference between balance and broke, like I just mentioned. If they're fully broke and they're just using a stinger, they're not going to be able to buy a rifle for the next round. So leaving them alone would be a great play, as opposed to them being balanced and then moving into the broke stage, right? Make sure you're paying attention to which stage the opponent is at and how they would benefit depending on that rifle. Okay. In Indian service, people get so mad when you use the Odin or Ares. Yeah, I think that's everywhere. People get mad at the Odin. But yeah, stuff like that, right? So let's say the rule of thumb you would think about is simply, if the enemy team can't buy for next round, then you can start looking at hunting the opponent. You can also think about whether you have enough money to survive that death. Okay. Does leaving one alive still matter? Are you talking about whether? Wait, what do you mean by that? Can you develop that question?
Like, let's say, what's it called? They all have like 3,500 credits, and they still like save or whatever. Does like, if they're attacking and we're defending, and like for some reason they don't have time to plant bomb, does us like, if we leave him alive, does he still get as much money as they would if they die or no? You know what I mean? I
Oh,
don't
you're
think
talking about that. So again, that's where it comes down to the saving versus hunting strategy. So if you know that they're not going to get enough money and they're broke, but they don't have enough time to plant, you kind of already semi-answered your question there. You probably would leave them alive, right? You kind of already know that giving them the plant is not going to give them enough money to make the change, right? Versus if you do something like, okay, this person will have enough money after they die, and they're just doing it for their team, then you can hunt this person down. If you know for a fact they're not going to be planting, and they're just basically saving their gun, you don't have to hunt if you know that they're going to be saving a stinger or something like that, right? That's where like the different variations of the stage of play kind of come in. And again, there's a lot of nuance. I cannot cover all the nuance in a presentation, but yeah, there's some things like that. So if they were, for example, the entire team is about to be able to buy if they get that plant down, you're probably better off killing that player, right? But at the same time, it's really hard to kind of gauge that difference because sometimes them losing that round is already enough for them to buy in the end of the day. So if you want to do like that mental math on your own, that's like a decision you will have to make. But most of the time, you're often than not better just kind of leaving them be if they have a worse weapon. So worse weapon, leave them alive. Good weapon, try to hunt if you have the money for it, right? That's probably the best way to balance it. Because if you're looking at credits and you're thinking, if I kill this guy, he will not give their team enough money to buy, then you're overcomplicating things. Because by the time that you fully think of that out, you might miss out on the opportunity to either prevent the plant, because they might plant anyway, or potentially help an opponent that might be chasing an opponent, right? So, help a teammate that might be chasing an opponent. So it's just stuff like that. So try to pay attention to what stage of wealth the enemy is in, what weapon they're holding, and what stage of wealth you are in, and what kind of weapon you're holding. If they're holding a rifle and you're hunting and you guys know you guys will have money because you guys basically beat them on an eco, then yeah, go ahead and hunt. Why not, right? You could upgrade your weapon and you could make the weapon worse. So that's one thing you can do. And that's basically the same thing when it comes to saving, right? It is the same thing, it's just inversed. I don't have enough money. I have a stinger. I'm going to be able to buy next round. I'm just going to go out there and try to see if I can get some kills. Even by hurting their shield, they have to buy a 1,000 heavy shield. So that might be enough, right? Or it could be something as simple as I have a rifle my team can't buy. We might be able to use this rifle for entry and still keep us in the fight, potentially. Very similar to a partial buy because your team is playing around you, right? So yeah, just flip the scenario on yourself and you should be able to use that save to your advantage. If your team is going to have enough money by planting, then maybe you should try to go for a plant, even if it costs you your life, right? Again, after all, this is a team game. This is a lot easier to execute, I should say, when you are playing in an actual team instead of ranked. But when you're playing in ranked, just focus on how much money they have versus how much money you have. Okay, if you have enough money, kill them. If you don't kill them, right? Leave them alone. Same thing with that. Does anyone have any questions? This is actually a great place to ask any questions now to finalize the class. Any questions at all? Or anybody that wants me to clarify anything that I've mentioned in the class?
Do you think Chambers should always be hunting because he has a ability for a gun or a gun for ability?
See, that's the same question that I get from players that have that left jet, and they're like, "I have jet knives. Should I still be hunting?" Only if you're proficient. I find that some players, there's no reason for them to give themselves a disadvantage. They're gonna be playing, and the disadvantage from them playing is going to be very, 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 very high because they're not really either used to knives or they suck with knives or they just know that pro teams use knives when they're like low on money, right? Make sure that you are aware of your own weakness as a player. If the chamber sucks, and I mean it, if they are not good with the deagle and it's just an edge they're getting, then I would suggest they wouldn't, right? That's what I would tell them. But if they're really good and they're just as good on the deagle as they are on a rifle, then they might as well. Why not, right? But again, that goes back to the question: were they saving a stinger? If they're saving a stinger, and you get the kill and no one else trades, right? Then you just basically donated a rifle to them, right? Amazon Prime style. So again, pay attention to how much money they have, how much they're saving, and what the inverse is. Because if they're not really good with the deagle or they're not really good with the knives, they're not really providing any value for your team anymore. So pretty much, yeah, don't hunt if you're at a disadvantage, pretty much. If your disadvantage is going to be playing with the deagle, again, I've seen a lot of players that are just horrendous with it, then don't do it. But if someone can buy you and you're still good with the deagle, then that's just a double plus, right? If someone can buy you, that would probably be a better decision or a better way to inform your decision on whether you should hunt or not. Okay. Someone mentioned, you said use a rifle for the next round. So I mentioned that in the partial round of things. If you are someone that is still good enough to play with the round and your team is not playing off of you, you can just play it like a hero round. You can lurk. Maybe you can use it to make more damage. You can still save the rifle and still have a strategic advantage on the next. So yeah, you can use that to your advantage still if you want to. You can also tell players, you can do something like, hey, I'm going to be using this rifle, and if they don't play off of you, then that's whatever, right? But you still try to do damage and you still try to get a kill. So hopefully that's really helpful. So yeah, pretty much a save either way, because you still want to keep yourself in an economic advantage to some degree. Because after all, in a ranked game, you can only rely on yourself, right? So that's the solution I would pick. I think that's just like maybe an elo thing, because I don't think that's just Indian servers, as you mentioned. I see it all the time in plat lobbies and gold lobbies. So I think that's just everywhere. Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's finalize this class. If anyone has any questions, you can ask them as I'm preparing the scrim. It seems like we have enough players for that. I'm gonna close it right now. Thank you guys for coming.